Welcome in to Think Deeper, presented by Focus Press. I'm one of your co-hosts, Joe Wilkie, joined as always by Jack Wilkie and Will Harrub. And today's episode is connected to a Think Magazine article that came, or Think Magazine rather, a topic that came out, I believe, in December, correct? Which is the December issue. Satan's attacks against the home. Fantastic issue. Go check it out. Make sure it's now free. Of course, it's digital. It's free. So go online. Jack, where do they go for that?
Focuspress.org/think.
There you go. So make sure to pick up your copy. This is going to be a companion piece. It's something we're going to try to do each month, which is doing an episode that coincides with whatever magazine is coming out at the time, whatever the topic of the month may be. And so we are a tad bit behind recording this one, but with the holidays and the holiday hangouts and everything else, it got crazy. And so we're coming around to this one. We'll be recording the January one probably sooner than later. But this is something we have talked a lot about in different areas. You're going to hear some tidbits from different podcasts. You can go back and we're going to cover things like pornography. We have podcasts on that, and masculinity. We have podcasts on that. But we're kind of distilling them all just to look at the unique ideas to like how specifically is Satan choosing to attack the home in the year 2025? What are trends that we've been seeing, things that we are maybe looking ahead to and seeing this could be really bad. This is ways that he's really gotten into the home. We know that the home is really the foundation, the cornerstone. Solid marriages and solid homes are the cornerstone of a solid society. Our society has fallen off a cliff. We have almost collapsed as a society, specifically morally. Well, that starts within the home. Satan knew what he was doing when he attacked marriage, when he made no-fault divorce and things like that legal. We know that the home started to fracture, and with that came the rest of the church and local communities and then society as a whole. And so we're very passionate about creating strong, Christian, healthy homes within, obviously, as our work at Focus Press. We talk a lot about this. We've had a lot of books come out. Jack has done this. Brad's spoken on this for years on creating healthy homes. And so we wanted to really do a deep dive today on that specific topic.
This is something that I was going to actually shout my dad out for. Joe, you just mentioned the fact that Dad has been on this train of the church losing young people, the church shrinking, kind of talking about the threats that are facing it for, probably a decade now or even more. And where I really want to give him full credit, something that's been a hobby horse of mine recently, is that kind of Dad's thing about it is he's not saying, okay, and to solve it, we need to go out and make sure that we are just door knocking 1,000 doors a month. We need to go out and make sure that we are going to foreign third world countries and all these things, which are obviously important evangelical things, or evangelistic things, I should say. What he's talked about is, if we want to make sure and kind of stop this leak, this dropout rate, the people that are leaving the church, we need to fix the homes. We have to address the homes. And I think that is again, a shout out to him for I think he's accurately seeing that is the issue. That's kind of the main reason why our churches are weak and why our churches are struggling, is because our homes are weak and our homes are struggling. And so I do think it's a really good thought exercise to say, okay, if I was Satan and I wanted to attack, the home, what is it specifically that I would do? What are some things that I would try to target? What are some things that I would try to do amongst the family? And so I think that's, from a general sense, the main thing that we're going to be talking about with this episode today.
Yeah, that some of the people that disagree with us on these things, we've talked about the church's decline and how people don't want to hear that. It is the lack of specifics on this kind of thing. It is essentially kind of this idea that it'll sort itself out, and you'll get generic sermons on marriage or parenting or whatever else, but really drilling down into what Christian families face today, that's doctrine. That drives me crazy. When we talk about doctrine, we mean debating Calvinists and Catholics. No, this is when Paul told Timothy to preach doctrine, it was the real life stuff. And so this is a very doctrinal episode, the doctrine of how to be a Christian, a mother, father, husband, wife, kid, the home. And you go all the way back to the Garden of Eden. Satan's attack was on the home. That's how he tears apart society, is tearing apart marriages, tearing apart what God designed so perfectly. And so that being the case, again, it is a great issue of Think Magazine. I encourage you to pick it up. We're going to take some of the things that people wrote on in there, but we're going to go some other directions with it as well. One that has been a big concern of ours, and there's a great article in there by Forrest Antimosaris on spiritual headship. Satan, that was his first attack, right? Was going to the wife instead of Adam. undermining the command that had been given down from God to Adam and should have been from Adam to Eve about the tree and the fruit of the tree and not eating of it. And Satan works on her. She undermines, she gives it to Adam. Adam abdicated the role. And then the blame starts going around. And then the curse was your desire is going to be for your husband, which very much seems to be for his power. And he's going to rule over you. This inner sexual dynamic between husband and wife of who wears the pants in the family. And when we talk about this, I think a lot of times people, amen, that's right. People who do this, people who live this way, people who don't realize they're doing it because we're in a culture that's so saturated with it. And so I want to get to the practical examples. Obviously, the woman who makes every decision for the family and the husband just kind of kowtows, goes along, like that. Everybody can see that, but there are subtle ways. There are subtle ways that even trad wife homeschool moms run the family and things like that, that this is going to be where he's going to start every single time, is to get a passive husband, a usurping wife, and all the trickle down effects from that.
Yeah, I was reading a book, The Covenant Household by Doug Wilson. I have talked about that one before. The very first sin, he mentioned sins of the man, sins of the woman. I think we have a future episode on, not related to that book, but a future episode or two on that specific topic. But the very first one he mentions for men is abdication. You take your role and you abdicate the role and you say, nah, I'll let my wife do it. I'll kind of let her take this over. How many guys are willing to sit by while their wives do all the spiritual training up of the kids? Well, the wives are the ones that study the Bible in the morning. The wives are the ones that pray with the kids at night. The wives are the ones that help the kids memorize scripture or basically catechize the kids,
or involved in the church.
Or involved in the church, exactly. She's the one getting them to church, and maybe she can just drag them along to worship, the father along to worship. And yeah, but he's really busy. He's had a tough week, boy. He'd really love to stay home, but okay, I guess we'll just get the kids in the car and go to church. And so even if he's doing the right things, the mindset is like, if I have to, my wife really wants me to do this. And so she becomes the spiritual leader without ever being the spiritual leader. Like, she's not trying to be in some cases, but the guy is so blasé about it, is so kind of like, give her, I'll come or go, like I'll take her to leave it type of thing. She's the one that pushes everything, but a lot of wives know it's supposed to be the husband that leads. And so she tries to get the kids to see it. The kids pick up on this stuff. The kids pick up whether the guy is deciding to actually go to church, if he wants to go to church, if he's ready to go to church. He's been prepping the kids. He's been prepping everybody for the week to get ready to worship God, versus the guy who just, his wife drags him along. Kids see that, kids notice it. But I would say the spiritual headship going south is that two-sided, maybe the two-headed snake, or the two sides of the coin of like men who abdicate their role and who give it up willingly because they're just too busy or work matters too much or whatever else. Then you have the feminist woman who doesn't think she's feminist, but who continues to try to like usurp and make little decisions along the way and kind of leave the thing on his nightstand and like force him to be a certain way and then lead the family in a specific way. If you call her on it like, no, I'm just trying to help. There's a lot of women that I think subtly view themselves as, and this is in my opinion, a result of weak preaching, who always kowtows to the woman and always browbeats the men. You have a lot of women that I think they view themselves as the spiritual one in the marriage, and the guy has all these issues to fix. He's got to fix himself. He's got to do X, Y, Z. And so they feel very justified in kind of taking that leadership role because my husband's a wreck and I've got it all together. Would they ever tell you that? No, but based off of the way they act, that comes through strong. So I think it's two sides of the coin of this basically drop or decline in spiritual headship. Will?
Yeah, I think about the word discipleship was kind of blown up a bit out of proportion in the sense of like there was such a hyper focus on discipleship and whether it was some of the books that came out in the evangelical community over the past decade or so, and just
very ill-defined too.
Yeah, exactly. But when I think of this point that you guys are bringing up, that's exactly what I think of, in the sense of we have a lot of congregations that are full of churchgoers. They're not full of disciples. And I think the reason for that is exactly what you guys are saying. The way that God designed it and the way that God set it up is for, specifically within the home, who is going to be the primary influencer into whether or not a child becomes a disciple or a churchgoer, just somebody who kind of loosely goes to church. It is the father. You go to Ephesians chapter 6, that he specifically says, fathers, don't provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, he doesn't say mothers. He doesn't even say parents. He says, and you fathers do this. Why? It's because the father is the single most influential factor, if you will, on to whether or not a child will become a faithful disciple, a faithful follower, or somebody who just shows up on Sunday mornings and, kind of, again, passively attends. And that's what makes for these weak congregations. And so, yeah, I have very little patience for men who abdicate their roles. Joe, I think that's the perfect word is abdication. I know that's Doug Wilson's word, but still, like, abdicating your role and choosing to have God did not design the mother to be the primary one doing the discipling for your teenagers, for your kids as they grow up. Obviously, we're firm believers in homeschooling. We think that the wife and mother can and does play an enormous role in making sure your children are educated and are brought up under biblical precepts. But when it comes to truly making somebody a disciple and instilling in them these biblical precepts and Christian apologetics and raising them, specifically men or young men, to be faithful Christians, if the father's abdicating their role, it's going to be incredibly difficult because you're going to be once again going against the way that God designed it. So that's kind of where my mind goes with this point.
Well, and we live in this world that encourages the girl boss for the woman and the man child. Now, we're sports fans as much as anybody else, but it's so easy for the man cave thing, sports and video games and kind of his hobbies and interests. Like, you can have your hobbies and interests, but you have to make sure you're living for bigger purposes than that. That you're not just the same guy you were at 13 years old. And it's society is encouraging that. Just, hey, be this dumbed down man child and go the other direction. And so when a guy starts to step up into that, then you've got all these breaks like, whoa, will this go too far? Like, well, it can, but hang on, we're working in the right direction here. And I loved what Forrest wrote in his article I mentioned on it in the Thing magazine. He said, he brought up, Jesus coming to not to be served, but to serve. He said, these passages inspire Christian leaders to lead with humility, love, and service. But tragically, they are also used to justify an ungodly brand of leadership wherein any exercise of authority is deemed unloving, unsacrificial, and prideful. These passages demonstrate an exercise of authority that is very different from the world, but is still authority. We have to be able to understand that there is authority and what it looks like, and it's good, healthy authority in the home. I want to go, before we get off of this point, though, one other direction. You might have women listening like, well, my husband isn't doing that. And so the thing that I think gets missed is one of the Satan's next moves is, if the husband isn't doing that, is he tells the woman, all right, you step up and get it. The way he undermines the home is by telling her to just jump in the driver's seat and take over. Well, there's going to be some things she has to do for sure that he's not doing, picking up. If he's not taking the family to church, she needs to take the family to church or whatever it may be. On the other hand, she's going to feel the need to just completely steer the family and in a way that leads her to being unsubmissive. And as 1 Peter 3 talks about, sometimes it is that quiet submission in the absence of him doing what he's supposed to that's going to bring him around. And so, I mean, Satan has so many openings that he can get to on this particular one that he uses so well because of the way we misunderstand what a man is, we misunderstand what a woman is, we misunderstand what a marriage is and what a household is and what authority is and all of these other things. And so, man, one misstep on those and he's got an opening.
So I did want to ask that question. I'm sure we have a lot of middle-aged moms that listen to the podcast, so thank you to all of them who do. I'm sure there are several out there who are looking around going, man, my husband is not leading. He's not taking the stepping up in that role. But they also aren't looking to just usurp. They're not looking to lead, and they are talking about the quiet and submissive, and they're trying to do it. What other advice would you guys give to that woman who's saying, man, I've tried to be quiet and submissive? Is this a waiting period of just, maybe they've been trying to do it for years and just quietly do it, and the husband's not getting it? Is there a difference? I think there is a difference between the non-Christian husband they're trying to win over versus the Christian husband who's just not doing what he's supposed to do. Like, what recourse might she have on helping him lead other than just doing it for him?
The first thing I'll say is there's obviously a huge difference between the non-Christian who you could argue might not know any better versus the Christian husband who 100% does know better. And there's, again, I have very little patience for the people for the men like that who are just, call it laziness, call it apathy, whatever it is, that just refuse to do it. So, Joe, my answer would be twofold. One is, and I'm sure this is one that is, kind of a no-brainer, but make sure that you are still, specifically for the Christian husband who just is either refusing to or is slow to get around to it, make sure that you are still communicating with him about it in a non-nagging fashion, if that makes sense. I would say continue to bring it up, continue to maybe express concern, or hey, can we talk about this for a few minutes? And we're about to go to bed or whatever. I'd love to chat about this, and almost in a nudgeful without nagging way, which I know is a lot easier said than done, but just making sure that it is still been brought up as far as communication with him goes. Because if you don't do that, then what's going to fester? Bitterness and frustration, and you're never going to get that out. And it's just going to build and build and build. That's not healthy. And so while it might still be frustrating that maybe you are having these conversations and stuff still isn't getting done, I would say continue that. But then the other thing I was going to say, I'm curious y'all's thoughts are on this. At what point can she get the elders involved? At what point is there biblical authority, I guess, for her to go to the elders and just say, my family is struggling, my husband won't lead. I'm not trying to rat him out or anything like that, but I don't know what to do. I need some help. To me, that is, at least it's perfectly within the elders' authority to kind of step in and handle that situation, or at least try to help and address it. Whether or not she has the right to go and do that is, I guess, what's up for debate. But that would be the other thing that came to my mind is like, this is for the elders of the church to say, all right, listen, man, again, this is not a situation where you're not a Christian and you don't really know any better and we don't have any authority over you. You're a member of this congregation. You're a husband. You're a father. You're clearly not leading. What are we going to do to change that? Jack, I'm curious your thoughts.
This is a can of worms that has been swept under the rug for decades, and generationally we're going to have to like rediscover the blueprint for this kind of thing. I think we think that eldership is only allowed to hold people for negative actions. They can't encourage and push positive actions. We will punish the thou shalt nots. Thou shalt not commit adultery. You do that, okay, you're in trouble. The thou shalts, the things that you're supposed to do, the sins of omission, commission, however you want to divide that up. We think elders have the right to get involved on one side of that, but if, he's not as good of a husband as he should be, he's not keeping that positive commandment, he's committing a sin of omission. We can't really do anything about that. I think Will's exactly right. Yeah, they can. And I think this idea of the church shaping better men, shaping better women, shaping more involved husbands and leading husbands and all that is a lost art that's going to have to come back. It's also really hard. It's going to be, wow, you're getting into people's business. Wow, that's their marriage. And who are you to say, well, that's what the Bible says. I mean, like that, it's not me. It's not the elders. It's not people just being nosy. It's, hey, your life will be better. In everything we talk about, the underlying point is things are best when you do it Christ's way. And your family, but there are ripple effects. Your children, your church family, your community are going to benefit or hurt based on you doing things Christ's way. So you need to do it Christ's way. And so Will's exactly right. The churches and church leadership needs to get involved on things like this. It's going to be a hard sell to get a lot of them to believe that they have that role. B, the ones that do, it's going to be trial and error. It's going to be pretty hard. It's going to be really uncomfortable. That's kind of the roll up our sleeves work we're going to have to commit to in the next coming generations. Hey guys, I wanted to tell you about A Closer Walk with Thee, Volume 1. It's a devotional book written by Joe and me. It is 90 days worth of devotionals that each day gives you a Bible reading, a prayer, a meditation, and a discussion question. Something that you can do quickly. It's something you can share with others. Something that will give you 3 months worth of devotionals to get your year off on the right foot. It's currently available on Amazon, coming soon to the Focus Press store. So go check out A Closer Walk with Thee, Volume 1 today.
But if not them, then who?
Well, that's exactly it. That's why they have to do it, but it's not fun.
No, not fun at all. But the point I'm making is, in a feminist world, which is what we live in, the church the men have been feminized, the women have been have turned into feminists in a lot of ways, because we look at it, and instead of protecting the damsel in distress, so to speak, and the elders are stepping up, going, you know what? It is not her job to lead the family. It's not her job to get her husband to church. He needs to do this of his own accord. And if the only reason he shows up to church is because she asks him to show up to church, and she's, always having to pressure him to do the right thing, he's not in a safe state. I'm sorry, he's not in a good place. He's not in a safe state. That is very much the elder's concern. But because we back up and go, well, she can handle her own business, that's within the home, that's between them. No, the guy is in sin, and that legitimately falls in your purview as an elder to say, we got to take him aside. So no, it's not easy. But if you don't lead as an elder, You are forcing the wife to step up and do something that A, is not her role, and B, Adam is judged even worse for this. You let your wife lead. You listen to the voice of your wife. And so you're actually putting the husband in an even worse state, that he's having to, he's going to have to answer, why did you let your wife lead? And they're going to have to answer, why did you let the wife lead? You could have stepped in and said something, and instead that's between them. So I think that's the feminist agenda we're dealing with in terms of spiritual leadership. It's going to start with elders who are willing to step in and get their hands dirty to a certain degree, the nitty gritty. And the second thing is elders who do this themselves, who can coach a man along because they are strong spiritual leaders in their home and they know what that looks like. And they can sniff it from a mile away going, that guy's not doing what he's supposed to, rather than, wow, we didn't even know. Come on. If you're paying attention, these things will show up. There's a man who's clearly disengaged type of thing. Elders have to know their flock. So yes, I put a large amount of this on the elders. The wife taking the elders to the husband is a sticky situation because what are your thoughts on that, Jack? Because I'm curious.
We're all on one side of the coin. You need at least as much of the other side of the coin. Of it's just as common for the wife to be, not carrying her role.
That's true.
And this is even like, I think you might get elders who will go to a delinquent husband and say, do your job. The idea of getting them to go to a wife and be like, hey, he says you haven't washed the dishes in 3 years and you refuse to do it. Good luck. That's, that is something that even people hearing me say that would be like, you can't do it. Why not? This is right. So the Bible says she's to submit to her husband. And if she says, I'm not doing that,
because it violates our subconscious critical theory.
Right. Well, it does. Thank you. That absolutely ring the bell for that. It comes up. That's why we did an episode, because it comes up in so many ways. And the idea of confronting women, confronting insubordinate women, confronting women who won't submit, who won't play their part in the family, like that is something you cannot do. Because the other thing is, we live in this society where with child custody laws and stuff like that, she holds the pin to the grenade, and things go bad enough, she can throw a temper tantrum and blow up the whole family, which has happened to a lot of people.
A lot.
Because if he leaves, he doesn't get the custody of the kid. Like, he doesn't have the leverage there, and he shouldn't. We should have divorce laws and marriage laws and custody laws that highly disincentivize all of this. We've got ones that highly incentivize women to go do their own thing. And how many churches have seen a woman do that to her family? And it's kind of like, well, I sure wish that hadn't happened. Like, who had a chance to do something about this? If not, as Joe said, if not you, then who? And so, yeah, we're talking about getting elders to talk to the men and shore up the men and all that. Absolutely. We need that as well. We need that. And we also need elders' wives and mature Christian women to take them under their wing. One of the problems we have is the proverbial elder's wife who runs the church, that she's not a submissive wife. She's not anybody who can teach that, because she's never done it. And so we're I wouldn't say we're in uncharted territory. We're having to rediscover charted territory kind of thing. The weeds have grown under our feet a little bit, in the last 100 years. And we're going to have to cut them back, and it's going to hurt. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to drive some people away because they can't stomach biblical accountability on these things. I don't want to spend our whole episode on this, but
I was going to say,
it's so
I know we got to move on,
impactful.
But I want to come back to another question though, which is, because this is very relevant to some people. What is the role? Like, can spouses take the other spouse to the elders? And what's the role of church discipline with a spouse? You're living with them. You can't pull away from them. I know this is the nitty gritty, but this is real life for people where it's like, me and my spouse is in sin. I don't know what to do. Do I take them to the elders? What does church discipline look like? I can't withdraw from them. I'm taking care of them. Like, now we're really in uncharted territory, because not even Paul speaks to the, obviously the guy with his father's wife. Bigger issues there. We don't really know how the spouse is supposed to do it. So we're trying to take biblical principles, but it doesn't necessarily speak to that. What is the Matthew 18 we can follow? You went to your spouse, you took somebody else, you take them to the elders. What is the recourse, I suppose, for a married couple who's looking at this going, man, my husband has not stepped up, or my wife has not? This is another big one. My wife has refused to sleep with me for the last year. She's refused to have sex. Well, I can directly point to 1 Corinthians 7 and say, you're in sin because of that. You refusing to sleep with your husband, you are in sin. Hey, that's not going to go over very well with elders stepping in on that one, but that is exactly where they need to. Does the guy take his wife to the elders and say, what do I do about this? And if so, what steps do you go from there? What are your guys' thoughts?
Just briefly, to establish Joe's point, what we've said about the submission thing or whatever else, It is a sin. And what is the recourse for dealing with a Christian who is living in sin? The shepherds of the congregation. So if this is all like radical new stuff, it's like this is just textbook. I mean, like this is what
Well,
it is. So I just
that's what
wanted to
I
throw
was
that
gonna.
in.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. Is if it's so kind of repulsive for people to think about elders doing that, it's probably because a lot of elderships are not putting themselves in positions to do those things. And we've had eldership episodes before. This is not any new territory, but I do think that there is the idea that, man, if you see an elder kind of taking an active, or an eldership, I should say, taking an active step into somebody's life for church disciplinary reasons, or for maybe, people view it as overstepping bounds, it's because they're not used to that, because elderships aren't typically doing that as they should be. And so that's why, I mean, even somebody like me, I've grown up in the Church of Christ my entire life. I obviously believe passionately about these things. As I listen to Joe describes the husband bringing his wife to the elders about this issue, even my brain goes, "Oh man, that sounds rough." Why? Because not to throw shade on anybody, but been around a lot of elderships who that's not anywhere near anything that they're going to be able to, or be ever. That's not ever anything they're going to do. They're not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole, and that's the problem. And I want to take it back to Satan's attacks on the home. If I was Satan and I was going to do that, what would I do? I would first of all convince the church that the real issues that the church is facing are, doctrinal disagreements, new heavens, new earth stuff. Like, man, that's where we really need to plant our flag. Like, that's what I would convince church leaders. And then I would also convince church leaders that for the most part, they need to stay out of people's lives. For the most part, maybe they need to make sure that folks are coming to church, but maybe not even that, to be honest. But other than that, just make sure that the budget's still good and the thermostat is fixed and all these things. Look around. That's kind of what Satan's done, is he's told elderships to this point, Joe, that you're bringing up, that's not really within their right to do. And so all of our brains, once again, are conditioned to where if an eldership ever did that, a lot of people would be shocked. And so I think Satan's done a very good job of this, unfortunately.
I think the elder side of it, the other issue, there's a lot of churches that have no eldership. And when you talk about men's meetings, they don't carry the same weight as elders. And so going to the men and saying, "Hey, my wife is in sin," or going to the men and saying, "My husband, you guys need to work with my husband," then it's kind of they all stand back like baseball, right? Who's got it on the pop fly, and they all stand back and watch the ball hit the ground. So often that's what takes place, is everybody drops the ball because nobody wants to step up. That's the importance of elders. But I suppose on the question, there has to be a level of maybe the grace period, or not grace period, but like the extended period before you go pull away from somebody has to be extended for a certain amount of time. But this is where you got to have all hands on deck as a congregation, whether it's the elders or the men. You have to have all hands on deck, where the moment that a wife or a husband comes to them and says, "My spouse is in sin," you need to have like 3 guys over there a week going, "Hey, let's do a Bible study. Let's go. Let's go to the gym. Let's start it in the gym. We're going to come over. We're going to help you guys. I hear you guys are having some issues." We have to get uncomfortable here. If we're not going to go to and I don't know where I fall personally on being able to pull away. Like, do they leave for a time, separate themselves for a time? Divorce is not the answer. It's never the answer. Do you separate for a time while this person gets their act together and comes back? Is that how we do 1 Corinthians 5 amongst a married couple? Very difficult to know, but the church needs to have, once again, all hands on deck, where it's an all-out blitz. We've got to get this guy right with God. He's got to lead his family. That would assume there's enough men that know how to lead their family and that have the guts to actually stand up and tell this guy to call him to something better. But I think it has to be very consistent, rather than "Hey, I'll check in once a month and see how he's doing." That's not going to accomplish anything when it comes to a man taking on the rightful role that he's been given.
I'm going to say this to wrap this point. Yeah, we need people like that. And so that's the call to the deep thinkers, to people listening. Position yourself as that person. If your church doesn't have those people, start working yourself in. It doesn't happen overnight. You don't just start, show up on somebody's door tomorrow and be like, "Hey, let me help you with your marriage." It is the things we've talked about. Have people over in your house, call people, check on people, be the guy at worship who's really encouraging and got a finger on the pulse and things like that. Start earning that credibility, because boy, do we need it. And there's opportunity here. There is an open door for somebody to step up and start leading. And it's an acquired taste. People might not like it at first. Slowly but surely get yourself there. That's what I love about our audience. It's not everybody, as I said last time, we're not Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm not recruiting everybody for this role, because not everybody can do it. Some of you guys listening can. Some of you are doing this. I'm very proud of people I've talked to that I know who are taking this up. start working yourself into that role because we really need it.
This isn't imitate me as I am like Christ. It is not humble to go, oh, they would never listen. I don't have it all together either. Somebody's got to have it together. Okay.
Well, and get it together. Don't, I mean, if your life's a wreck,
say,
don't be the guy to be stepping into somebody else's.
Sure.
Get your house in order and, start being
there's
the
a lot
guy
of people, 95% there that go, I just can't be the guy. You can be the guy. Paul wasn't perfect either. He still says, imitate me as I'm like Christ. We have to have older people that say, imitate me. This is what it looks like in a positive marriage. And everybody wants to be, we don't want to be arrogant. And so nobody wants to step up. I struggle with that with Paul. Paul's arrogant. No, he's not. We have to have somebody to look to. Please, as older members, you have to step up and give us somebody to look to and say, imitate me as I'm like Christ in my marriage and what it looks like. This is what it should look like. Stop using the whole humility excuse to not step up and tell us what we're supposed to do. Sorry, that's just a rant.
No, I've got an article on that, and either out now or coming out soon. So sign up, jackwilkie.com. But let's move on to the next one.
Sorry, Will.
It's such an important point. But on this next one, you would probably expect social media was going to come up in this, and it is. The kids are on TikTok, mom's on Instagram or Facebook, dad's on Twitter, X, whatever. And they're getting their things. But I think the thing that divides families over this is it's divided loyalties. Is you end up more loyal to, and I've seen this happen like in real life, like in a coffee shop. This girl was attacking her own parents or grandparents. I couldn't tell the generation gap there over like defending the honor of this celebrity. And it's like she was doing it in a sense of like almost like you see people do on Twitter or on X, on whichever social media site, of like standing up, like this doesn't matter. But like her loyalty was more toward this celebrity than it was to her parents, of like, it was ridiculous. But you see people do this of the mom, like she's got kind of her online community or like this identity that she's got with the Instagram people, the influencers she follows. And then she turns and brings that back into the home, and the husband's not allowed to he has to respect this identity she brings, or the kids with TikTok, and they've got these things. And so you end up with families that have different political views, different religious views, and then you're supposed to all come together and it's all supposed to be cool. We're supposed to just put up with this. Like, no, your loyalty is to your family. And I think when kids grow up and they're faithful after they leave home, it's because in large part, they've got to tie back to, I'm a Christian. I'm a part of this Christian family. This is my heritage. This is who I am. And when they don't, they go off to college and they want to impress all their friends. It's way less on, I was convinced that God isn't real, and way more than my friend group doesn't want me to believe that God is real, or that homosexuality is wrong, or that whatever that they end up drifting off into. And so you get these divided loyalties, and that starts on social media for so many people. Yeah. You don't even have to leave the house to start putting out a flag for, I'm going to be on this team and not the team of my home.
Identity is the word that I was going to use.
Yeah.
Because that's exactly what it is you get wrapped up in being, and she's just the most popular one, so I'm just going to say it. Your identity is being a Taylor Swift fan. Your identity is in being a, whatever it is that older people, for a lot of older guys, it's your political party or your obviously college football team or which those are kind of smaller examples. But the point that, Jack, I think you're getting at here is that specifically for young people, I mean, they can find their identity in certain activisms, being, social justice warrior, and their identity is found in all these things. It's like social media is the fuel to the fire, is the gasoline that is being poured on this society where everybody wants to fit in somewhere. Everybody wants to have their own identity. I'm this person. This describes me. You used to see those Instagram bios where, a biography is supposed to tell you about tell you about the person that you're following or whatever, and there's like 14 or 15 different things in the bio. It's like, how many different things are you trying to be? How many different identities are you trying to hold? But what's interesting about that is you find a Christian young person's bio, they might have Christian and they might have a Bible verse in there, right alongside 12 or 13 other things that they were attaching to their identity. And I think I'll speak to the young person's perspective for just a second and then hand it over to Joe. A lot of young people are not finding their identity in being a Christian whatsoever. It's just another, you have the analogy of the wheel where there's the center hub that everything else rotates around that's supposed to be our Christianity. No, for them, Christianity is just another spoke on the wheel, right alongside their academics, right alongside their celebrity, obsessions, right alongside their social media presence, right alongside whatever else. And so I think from a young person's perspective, when you're talking about Satan dividing the home, he does create these identities for young people that they can wrap themselves up in, where Christ, being a Christian, being a faithful Christian, is nowhere near the top of the list. And so, yeah, I mean, we've talked about the dangers of social media for young people. I think this concept of divided loyalties and then kind of taking your identity away from being a Christian is such an interesting angle. And Satan, once again, done a pretty good job of this in the church.
Yeah, I have so much to say on this because, like you said, it's an interesting angle. There's a lot of different ways to go with this. We are the world's biggest advocates for getting your kids out of public school. And I was thinking about this, Jack, as you were going off earlier, and Will, what you were just saying. This is a big reason why. Everybody thinks, well, for the evolution or for postmodernism. Yeah, for all the kids, there's a bazillion and one reasons to pull your kids out of public schools. This may be near the top of the list. Is the divided loyalties? Can I get the kid to be on the same page? And then I was having this thought, Will, I put a note down for later for a gym podcast idea, which is your last name matters. I think we covered some of that in gym, but your last name matters. Your surname matters. Like there is a level of the Wilkie name matters. And I want my kids to carry the Wilkie name with pride. And because we say, well, I don't want them to carry the name of Christ. Yeah, of course. But I also think family ties matter because you know what? Wilkies are Christians. That is, our family is a Christian family. That's what we do here. And setting the tone, i.e. fathers setting the tone, going back to the last point we just made, is such a big part. The divided home will be healed when fathers are willing to step in and say, this is what we do around here. And we don't follow Taylor Swift. We're not into that. Our identity is in Christ. Our identity is in being strong people, good friends, honest, hard workers. That's what the Wilkie name means to me, is these are the things that we've come from that I think are great, that we want to pass on to our kids. People don't think like this. They don't think generationally. And so, yeah, our homes are incredibly divided because you got a lot of dads that are wusses, a lot of dads that step back and like the last name. Well, it's not that big a deal. This is how you get the hyphenated names where somebody gets married and they have the woman keeps her last name. That's the biggest load of baloney I've ever seen. If you ever have a woman who asks to keep her last name, the surname along with yours and hyphenate, run for the hills, man. Get away from her and get rid of her immediately, because that goes to show she's not willing to take on the family name. The Wilkie name matters, and my wife is proud to be a Wilkie, and I'm glad to see that. So I know that's a completely different angle, but when we're talking about divided homes, you have to set the tone and the culture to say that's not what we do here. This is what the Wilkie name is all about, and this is what we do as Christians. As a Christian family, it goes back to the Thanksgiving episode, right? Everybody wants to get away from their family for Thanksgiving. No wonder why, because we're all divided, like Jack said. The public school idea and the TikTok and all the things that the kids are on, they're more attached to their friends than they are to their own family. We have to wrestle that back and say, friends in the end don't matter all that much, because the friend isn't going to show up for you when you need it the most. The friend's not going to be there on your deathbed the way your family's going to be. The friend's not going to be there when you break your arm and you're in the hospital and you need something. Family's the one that shows up first. You call your mom and dad. You don't call somebody else. Like, we have to get back to seeing family matters. And again, last names matter. And the divided family, Satan has done a great job of making everybody think we're all globalists and we're all big, one big family. No, we're not. We're just not. Okay. We have the Wilkie name matters to me, and I want my kids to carry it on. They're not going to carry on some random willy-nilly name that they come up with themselves. Families matter. Roots matter. And that's what's under attack with Satan, I think, is he's getting families to think that roots don't matter and my kids can be into whatever they want to be into. And then we're shocked when they get into LGBTQ. We're shocked when they get into atheism. We're shocked when they get into these other things. Like, you haven't steered your kids into anything that matters in your family. Why would you be shocked when they go the way of their friends? We have to create strong homes, which again goes back to fathers knowing what their last name actually means, what it means to be a family, what it means to set a culture.
In depth, but easy to understand. That's how War in Heaven, War on Earth, what the book of Revelation meant to the original readers and what it means for us today, has been described. An Amazon reviewer said it was the best commentary on Revelation he had read in 50 years. Bradley Cobb spent literally thousands of hours researching and putting together this material, showing how first-century Christians, the ones the book was written to, would have understood the book, how it matches with the rest of the Bible, and how it was something that was about to happen when John wrote it. Thoroughly biblical in his approach, including the dating of the book, and supported with first-century history, this 550-page book does not gloss over any details and includes points of application throughout each of the book's 48 studies. Great for personal study or for a year-long Bible class. Available on Amazon.com in hardcover, paperback, or Kindle. Yeah, I mean, you just got the scripture of Psalm 1 of who you're hanging out with. Are you meditating on God's law day and night? Or are you sitting with the scoffers and walking with the scornful and all that? Of bad company corrupts good morals in 1 Corinthians 15. And that's what happens when you kind of, again, you start signaling. That's this loyalty thing is you got to signal to your group. And one of the ways people signal to their groups these days is by kind of turning around and dumping on their parents and their family values and their Christianity and things like that of like, see, I'm cool. I'm part of you now and not part of them. Like you have to distance yourself from that group. And the more Christian your family is, the farther away somebody goes to show, oh, I'm not that anymore. And it's just this really sad thing you see playing out over and over. And so I think parents need to manage their kids' social media, but also they need to manage themselves. Like moms, look at what groups you're in. Dads, look at the kind of stuff you're scrolling. Make sure that is not. I talk about this with some of my buddies of like really making sure your online circles that you're traveling in are not something that your wife or your spouse is totally unaware of. Like be talking to them about that stuff because people end up being really radicalized in one way or another and their values and stuff like that while their spouse doesn't even know that it's happening because you go online and you're reading stuff with your buddies who are just way out there and then you go back home and you're the same guy. Well, meanwhile, you're becoming a different person. And like, so yeah, your first loyalty is to your God and your home, and your online activity needs to serve that, not the other way around. And that's one of the ways this happens. But before we run out of time here, I mean, obviously we've got to talk about you mentioned online activity, the pornography thing, the lust thing, because we talk about porn addiction, like that's pretty straightforward as to what it is. It's a bad thing. Joe's helped a lot of people out of it. He's got the Get Out of Porn podcast and book available at Focus Press, but also his therapy or whatever. He's the guy to contact if you're dealing with that. On the other hand, I think the casual pornography thing is something that undermines families a lot more. Of man, I don't go on to a site with naked people fornicating. I don't look up certain things like that. But you've got an Instagram feed where every now and then they're throwing something on there. The Facebook Reels, man, that algorithm is such that they're going to try and slide stuff in. They're going to try and it's just there. And so there's things that you can't help. But on the other hand, it's also one of those. It knows if you scroll and you linger on that, guess what's going to start happening? There's going to be more of that content. There's going to be more, and you can say, "Man, I never pulled up a swimsuit issue. I never pulled up a site like that. I never went to any of those things." Right from the comfort of Facebook, right from the comfort of Instagram or whichever site you're on, you don't ever have to leave what would seem to be a normal, wholesome place to be looking at things you shouldn't look at, men and women. I mean, the shirtless gym guys and movie stars for women, and I mean, just stuff like this. Really guard against the casual stuff. Obviously, the big stuff, 100%. No, nothing needs to be said about that. Yeah, but guard against the casual stuff. It tears you apart a little more than you think.
I'm really glad you brought that up because I think a lot of people can think porn addiction and go, "Oh man, so go into certain sites and well, I don't go to OnlyFans, I don't go to Pornhub, all these things." And it's like, yes, that's obviously the extreme, and as to Jack's point, I don't really think that needs to be said and talked about how bad that is. But specifically for you brought up social media, movies, TV shows, things like that might get a little bit more of an innocent label can still be just as harmful, specifically for young people, as going to a particular website can. And so, yeah, I mean, the whole idea of specifically on the apps where your history isn't really saved and you can kind of go visit anywhere you want and like it is very dangerous. And so, Jack, I think that was a much needed point to say when we're talking about lust for men, lust for women as well. It's not just about staying off of certain websites. For some people, this is why if you're somebody who struggles with lust or struggles with a porn addiction, man, one very, very helpful thing to do is just delete your social media. Delete Instagram, delete TikTok, or at least do one of those things where you don't have the app and you just visit it on the website so that your history is saved. Like stuff like that. I mean, it's Satan is not going to, well, man, I didn't get this person to visit that website. I guess I failed. No, he's going to try a whole lot of other ways. And again, whether it be social media, whether it be the hot new Netflix show that you're really wanting to watch or a movie in theaters, it's like, I don't think it's that bad. And you walk into Oppenheimer or whatever it is, you're like, whoa, I didn't know that was it. Like, there's a whole lot of avenues that Satan can use these days. And so, yeah, that was a much needed point.
Joe, why don't you address why that matters, like what it can do to a spouse if you start male or female, if you're just kind of casually dabbling in it?
Well, I think it undermines trust. I've worked with those that they happen to see their spouse's Instagram feed and they're like, whoa, what? Or the Instagram search history, or even on the explore tab or whatever. And all it is immodesty and such. That erodes trust in a marriage faster than almost anything else. You may not have physically been cheated, and it is not an out. Let me just say that. Let me speak that real fast. This is not a Matthew 19 out where, well, if they cheated on me because they lusted with their eyes, Matthew 5, well, nobody's going to prison for hating their brother, even though it says it's like murder. So it is not apples to apples. If your husband looks at porn, you can't just get out of the marriage. On the other hand, it erodes trust and it erodes every good thing in marriage faster than just about anything else. And it's also it erodes trust with yourself. Even if your spouse never finds out what you're doing on TikTok or what you're doing on Instagram or whatever else, you start objectifying your wife and you start objectifying women in different ways. And you have to live with yourself knowing I wasn't fully faithful to my wife in that way. I did not make her the pure object of my desire. I have a lot of other women that are the object of my desire. And so you start viewing your spouse in a different way. Sometimes guys start comparing their spouse, things along those lines. Even the casual is really, really bad. The other thing is, yeah, you are right for addiction. For women, we're talking like 1 in 3 right now. Women are looking at porn fairly regularly. So that always shocks people. It is an epidemic among women as well right now. So everybody kind of struggles with it to a certain degree, seemingly, especially young men. We're talking 75 to 80% from like 18 to 30. So our age range, just incredibly high on that front for the porn addiction. Well, how do you think that starts? It doesn't always start with everybody going to Pornhub. It starts with the Instagram feed where a Kardashian came across the Instagram feed and they go, oh, that's interesting. And they start, scrolling down that way and then more and more and more and more. It's the way addiction works, right? It's tolerance. And so you end up seeking more and more things. But it's also connected to emotional wounds, which goes back to our last point. We have a lot of broken homes. How do you think kids run from it? They run to their social media. And on social media, if they're not guarding themselves, they find sexually arousing stuff, which is a great escape, quote unquote. It's a horrible escape, but it's great in the fact that it will take you away from your problems as your mom and dad are undergoing a divorce or the family's fractured and you haven't talked to your siblings in months because everybody got their door closed. Like nobody knows what you're doing internally. You got all these emotional wounds and you're running to porn for that reason. So some practical things I'd say real fast.
One other thing I'd add to that is when you're carrying guilt, it affects how you treat other people.
Yes, it does.
In the simplest sense of if I have a bad work day and I just don't get that much done, my focus is not on or whatever, and I come up and my wife doesn't have the dishes done. Hey, what's going on? Like I'm taking out my frustration with myself on her. And the same can happen with these kinds of things of like if I'm doing stuff I know I shouldn't be doing, you start becoming the biggest judgmental person in the world on your wife, your kids, whatever else. You make the house a stormy place because you're not living up to your standards and you're trying to overcompensate with that and making other people do theirs. Like it makes it brings the joy of your house down a little bit, aside from what it does with your walk with God and not even a hint of these things among you. And, what the scriptures have to say about this. Yeah, all of that's there. And once again, God's commands make us happy. God's commands make us joyful and make our lives better. And when we don't, these things start happening to bring us down.
I forgot to make that point. That's I'm glad you came back around. It's such a good point. When you give up the moral authority in your home, good luck calling anybody to a higher standard. You see this in pulpits, guys that have sexual issues, things behind the scenes, all of a sudden they're a little squishy on sin. They're squishy on stuff and they preach grace a ton, but they can't really call anybody to a higher standard. Yeah, because they can't call themselves to that. We know when we're not doing the right thing as men, we have given up the moral authority in our home. Even if our wife doesn't know it, we know it. How am I supposed to call my wife out of her gossip, call my wife out of her issues when I know that I have all these issues internally and I'm certainly not going to let her know that. And so I keep it to myself. It shows up, yes, in the way we treat one another. We're a little snippier because we got this guilt we're carrying around, but we're also weak. We're wimps who can't lead their family because who am I to lead? I mean, I know I'm the chief of sinners, right? And so we never feel like we can actually take a bold stance on sin in the home. So creating the culture, we create a culture of hiding. We create a culture of secrecy. And what's fascinating is I've worked with the kids. I've worked with parents and sons who struggle with porn addiction, and they didn't know it about one another. The sons followed in the father's footsteps, and the father harbored this addiction for forever. He created this secrecy tone in the home, and guess what happened with the kids? And I'm not saying just because you struggle with it, your kids are going to struggle with it. There's a strong correlation for a guy who struggles with porn and the kids struggling with porn. And it's just the culture you set within the home. So yeah, it's a big deal. And if you're not guarding your eyes, why should your kids?
I heard a very interesting definition of culture, and that definition is the intersection of what is expected and what is allowed. And there's an
Mm,
intersection there, and that's basically where your
that's
culture
good.
is. And obviously, that the way where I heard it is in the terms of like an organization or a business, but I think it obviously could apply to your family as well. What's expected versus what's allowed, the intersection, that's where your culture is. I don't know where you're going to go next, Jack. We got to wrap up here in the next few minutes and get to think fast. But there was one other angle that I wanted to talk about when it comes to how is Satan going to attack the home and kind of different angles he does, and that is with our time. I mean, talk about a great way to really try to undermine the family is just get them spending less and less time together. Jack, you have something?
I'm actually going to put you off on that because the January issue of Think is focus and distractions.
Oh,
And so we're going to have a whole episode on that
so
here
I've
in a
got to
couple of
hold
weeks.
my thoughts on that for a whole month.
Well, start
Man.
taking down
But
notes.
then it gets an
So,
hour. All
Yeah,
right.
right.
yeah,
You get
that's
in,
right.
well, not a month because again, we're behind. We did our holiday
That's true.
hangout. We
Couple
did our
weeks.
year end. So this should have been like the December 20th episode. Now it's January and mid-January. So this one will be next week or the week after. We'll get to that, but not to cut you off, but there's a lot of meat on the bone there. So
For sure.
I don't want to just do it in 2-3 minutes, but really to summarize this whole thing, one of the things that just always hits me in the eyes reading through the Bible, there are no good families. I mean, there's like almost zero good examples of families in the Bible, and that's because Satan knows this is the pillar of humankind. And so he goes after it. He goes the sibling rivalries all throughout Genesis, every single one of them. And you see God working to where it gets a little better, a little better, a little better to where Joseph kind of heals it in the end of the book, which is great. But things don't just like it, it falls apart. David's family. I mean, there's so many examples of bad families. But at the end of the Old Testament, what does it talk about? When John's going to come and he's going to lead the way to Jesus, he's going to return the hearts of the fathers to the sons of the fathers, right there at the end of Malachi in chapter 4. This is what Christ's rule does, is it strengthens the home. And again, it's frustrating that the church has kind of said, oh, okay, well, here's a few generalities and good luck with it. No, we really need to focus on the stronger the home is, the stronger individuals we have, the stronger church we have, the stronger world we have. Satan knows that. That's why he goes after it. That's why he introduces these things. So appreciate you guys with the episode. Again, everyone that wrote for the issue is a really strong one. I want you guys to go get your copy at focuspress.org/think.
Completely free.
Free, totally free. Digital download, get it instantly. And there's an email sign up there to where you'll get every month's issue when it comes out. So be sure to join the mailing list there. But let's wrap with our Think Fast. As I was thinking about raising a family and the challenges of it, and we can talk about the internet and all the challenges it's brought. Here's your question. Would you rather raise a family 100 years ago or 100 years from now? One of those, obviously, you kind of know what it is, even though you haven't experienced it. The other one, there's some things you can project, but what do you think?
This is a great question. Jack is very good at these would you rathers. Um,
I think about
say, go ahead.
No, go for it. Sorry,
I was just going to say 100 years ago was a rough time. I mean, about to enter the Great Depression, one World War had already happened, and the other one is about to start here in a decade or so.
the lavishness of the Roaring '20s.
I would say probably 100 years from now, just as I think about because I mean, even after the two world wars, you have, Cold War, you got war in Vietnam, like it's a bit of a rough stretch there in the early 1900s, if you're like 100 years ago, starting in 1924. So yeah, I would probably take my chances and say 100 years from now, but that's a great question. Joe?
I was thinking the same. I don't know. Just because, yeah, we know what the '20s was all about back then. I think the more you study about the early 1900s, they had a lot of messed up stuff. They had transgenderism at the time. They had, the Federal Reserve had just been established. They had feminism coming up with prohibition. And on the back end of that, you have feminism really rising with women's suffrage and all of these things. Like all of the groundwork for what we saw at the end was laid, what we saw, toward the end of the century was laid very much in the teens and in the early 20s of the 1900s. And so on the one hand, there's no digital distraction, things like that. On the other hand, you're already getting into some pretty seedy stuff. So the problem with it is 100 years in the future, where might we be in the instant gratification culture, in the AI world that we're going to be living in? You talk about instant gratification toward lust and toward things like that. I don't know. It might be very scary, or things could completely collapse and fall off a cliff in 100 years, in which case we're back to the Stone Age. I don't know. I think I'd rather prepare my kids for the 100 years in the future. Jack, where do you fall on this? That's tough.
I think ease probably in the future, but as we talk about Satan always attacking the family, it's almost the devil you know versus the devil you don't. If you can look back and the simplified life does seem, even though it was very difficult circumstances, there were less opportunities. You were in a more Christian society, which would be helpful and things like that. I don't know. I kind of worry about like 10, 20 years down the road that to be faithful, you're almost going to have to go Amish, like how the technology is progressing and stuff like that. And so 100 years from now, I really don't know. I'll go in the past just to part company a little bit here. It wouldn't be easy. I'm not, and maybe that makes us respect our predecessors a little bit more of raising kids through the Dust Bowl, the Depression, the wars, and all that. But yeah, interesting.
That was a good one.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what to do with it, so I figured I'd see what you guys did with it. If you guys have an answer, leave it in the comments, of course, YouTube or wherever else, Focus Plus, and other things that you think that are Satan's attack on the home, other things you'd add to the list, or comments, questions on some of the things we addressed. We hit some things pretty hard here, so I think it made an interesting episode, at least from my perspective. So thanks to you guys, thanks to the listeners, and we'll talk to you guys next week.